thank you and welcome to this webinar about health tech storytelling and strengthening your strategic narratives. I'd like to start today with a quick story. Seems to be the way to go. So here it is. In 16th century Italy, a kid named Julius Caesar Aranzi, real name, found he really enjoyed picking apart the faces and brains of dead people. So to keep from being arrested, he decided to become a doctor of anatomy. And in 1564, he found a tiny part in the center of the brain that looked like a seahorse. So he named it that. But he used the Greek word, hippocampus. He had no idea what it did. Well, since then, we've discovered that the hippocampus helps humans generate emotions and make decisions. But in 2021, we learned something new. Neuroscientists at UC Davis conducted a brain imaging study that showed the hippocampus is also the brain's storyteller, connecting separate, distant events into a single narrative. Now, this is definitely not the part of your brain that processes information from things like investor decks or product fact sheets. We call that the frontal lobe, which manages logic and reasoning. Brains are weird. The part that makes decisions is not the part that uses logic. So if you want people to A, remember, B, like, and C, choose your company, you need to get their seahorses involved with stories. And with that, I'd love to do a couple of quick little introductions. My name is Kawika Holbrook. I'm the creative director here at Sterling Communications. We are a PR agency in Silicon Valley that has been helping tech companies, especially in healthcare and sustainability, tell better stories. I'm a former newspaper reporter, political ghostwriter, and retail trainer at Apple. I love helping clients tell their stories, their strategic narratives, to generate more news coverage and sales opportunities. And today I'm joined by Tina Burbine, the Principal of Strategic Advisory Services in Digital Health at Nordic Global. Not only does she have the longest job title of anybody I know, but she is living proof of the power of good storytelling in tech. So welcome, Tina.
Thank you, Kawika. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this discussion today.
Oh, thank you. And this discussion is going to take about 50 minutes or so. And you are welcome to join us. Tina and I are going to help you discover how better stories can help your healthcare technology company. And instead of relying on PowerPoint to keep your frontal lobe active, we're going to stick with the conversation today and send you all a transcript with a couple other goodies later. So, Tina, to help set the stage here, I'd like to ask you about Nordic Global. First, can you tell us what Nordic Global does and just give us the facts?
Sure. So we specialize in healthcare strategy through execution. And that includes a variety of things from advisory services to centers of excellence, implementation, on-demand talent, and managed services.
Excellent. Now, if Tina did her job correctly, she got your frontal lobe working with that set of facts, informative and necessary, but not sufficient. So what I'd love to do, Tina, is ask you the same question again, but this time, can you tell us a little bit about what Nordic Global does as a story?
Yeah, this is my favorite part, genuinely, because we use this verbiage about working with healthcare systems or teams to modernize, innovate, and grow. And we think about it from the perspective of being more than a vendor or a partner. And we think about it from the perspective of being their Sherpa, because it's all about helping a health system, a team understand what that long pathway up a mountain looks like that they're trying to cross over several peaks. And we're here in the background to help guide them to help avoid the rocks that we all know are along that pathway as we climb that mountain. And we can provide information, best practices along the way that says, hey, you can avoid this particular challenge if you consider these three things. Oh, watch out for over there. We've got your back. This is going to create some sensitivities, things like that, that really make a difference in how you work together as one team to scale the peaks in the industry that are challenging for everybody these days.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I want to point out a couple of things about what Tina just did there. When she switched from a recital of facts to elements of a story, however brief, she activated your hippocampus. And the better the story becomes, the more she or any company out there that we are working with will be able to activate another part of your brain called the hypothalamus. And that's where we get some really interesting chemicals. And as it turns out, they're tied to the 5 key elements that make up any good story. So I'm going to quickly set those. One is setting. You heard a couple of those in the 16th century, or scaling a mountain, but you know of plenty of others. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, once upon a time. Those are settings, right? You need a setting. But our brain uses that as a clue to get started paying attention to a story and starts firing up some of these chemicals. The next one is characters. I gave you one about, a kid with a goofy name who liked to pick apart faces. Well, suddenly your brain is starting to release something called oxytocin. Get into that in a minute. But scientists nicknamed it the love hormone or the cuddle chemical, right? So you got setting, you got characters, you got a point of view. And then you got a plot and conflict. Now, they're all important, but big healthcare companies often skimp on plot and usually avoid conflict when they're trying to tell their strategic narrative. And that could be a big mistake if you're a company leader or a communicator trying to get the attention of the press or investors or anything else like that. So, Tina, I want to get into your role at Nordic, and I would love for you to tell me a story about what it is that you do and why it is that stories make it better.
Yeah. Healthcare is complicated. And in order to do things differently in this current market landscape, we have to be willing to think differently as well. And change is really hard. So when we're talking with our clinical leaders or our operational leaders, describing what a new team structure or a new collaborative workflow might look like, it's complicated to talk about. And so putting it in the format of a story to really garner how it's going to impact the patient and the team is going to mean more. It's going to help them understand better, oh, all of the things that we need to consider along that journey and that path up the mountain. So the color behind it really helps dictate how much buy-in and leadership support and alignment and excitement about what's about to occur that is meaningful for bringing a team together to make that new thing work. And this could be a workflow. It could be a workflow and technology. It could be a variety of things, but it's the sentiment behind bringing the team together for a shared vision and really weaving it, what their meaningful part of that story is going to be.
Now, I know a little bit about Nordic. First of all, thank you. That's really helpful to understand some of these components.
Yeah.
When you joined Nordic, you obviously had your option of a lot of different companies that could use your talents and experience. But what was it about Nordic that enabled you to go from, yeah, I think this might be right, to, yes, this is the right this is the right company. And there's a reason I'm asking this question. I'm going to tie it back into stories in a second.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate the
What was
confidence.
the tipping
Yeah,
point?
it was very nice. So in my mind, there was a whole lot of reasons that I was attracted to the team, what they were looking, what they were doing, what they were looking to accomplish. But there were some really great things that stood out to me. It was our innovation lab, for instance. This concept behind moving beyond talking about something really complicated and being able to see it. So if I tie that back to some of the work we do around helping clients understand their data landscape, you can walk into an innovation lab and see what's missing in your data landscape. That makes the world so much easier for those leaders to be able to figure out what the next right step is to fill that gap. And that's going to drive a whole lot of things for them. So it was this concept of an innovation lab brought to life that we moved beyond talking about things and we moved into being allowing the teams around us to see and play with it. And that is really exciting.
Well, it's also exciting from a storytelling perspective because all of a sudden you have this incubator of ideas
Yeah.
where things don't always work.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we know at Sterling Communications dealing with the press for our clients as a public relations agency is that reporters need conflict. Every client comes to us and says, here's what we stand for,
Yeah.
right? And it's usually all good. But reporters don't need marketing. They need a story, and a story needs conflict. So we need bad guys. And one of the nice things about the Innovation Lab is that there's an inherent challenge, something to overcome.
Yeah.
And there might be conflict there in terms of the best approach. Does it go this way? Does it go that way? Do we involve
Yeah.
these people? Do we not involve those people? And I'm curious if, in your experience, throughout your career, if you've identified, especially for health tech companies, the antagonist in the story. We always talk about the protagonist. Maybe it's you, maybe it's your customers and what they're trying
Yeah.
to do. Who are the antagonists, or what is the antagonist?
Oh my goodness. Off the top of my head, I would say the biggest one would be the difference of opinion in a decision-making process. So what I mean by that is when a leadership team's coming together to implement a new care model or build out a new strategy and plan for something, everybody around the table has a different opinion. And it's not that there's one that's right or wrong. Every opinion has a different set of pros and cons with it. And so when you're working together, being able to support everybody talking through their perspectives and using something like an innovation lab to bring to life what it is we're discussing, it makes visualizing the pros, cons, the impacts, the challenges easier so that that team can, address the big antagonist, tackle it together, and then have a plan they all agree on to move forward with because it's the best fit, the thing that's right sized for them.
Yeah, I think one of the things, two things I want to tack onto that. One is for companies out there, whether or not they have a PR agency, whether or not they even have a communications department, the executives at the company need to know that in order to be able to gather those voices, to gather those opinions and insights, is the first step. But being able to sharpen the story that comes out of all of that. Not everybody has to tell the story the same way,
Yep.
but they all need to tell the same story. I
Yep.
think sometimes people get hung up on a particular word or phrase. And what they don't do is they don't step back and say, what is the story that we're telling? What's the setting? Who are the characters? What's our point of view? What's the plot? What's the conflict? Right? And then be able to shape that in a way that no matter what words you use, everybody hears the same story. And that's one thing that an outside agency can really help with. But it's, honestly, it's not necessary if you've got the team in place that understands how important stories are. It's certainly helpful, and we like what it is we do. But I think I wanted to bring up that point.
Yeah.
And then the other point I want to bring up is actually a story that we were involved with you, Tina, And it has to do with developing thought leadership. And maybe you can provide our audience a little bit of background about how we started working together and how we started working on some thought leadership to burnish the company's credentials and to elevate what it is that you stand for out in the world. And then we'll get into some specifics because I think our audience would really appreciate some nuts and bolts about how this came together.
Yeah. Well, we saw a need to talk about women's health and the care models that really aren't consistent or in a lot of cases don't exist in today's world. Especially in our rural communities, I could talk for days about that. And so we wanted to put an emphasis on, well, what about women's health is really imperative that we can all learn and grow with as an industry today. And narrowing in and talking about things like perimenopause and menopause, and not just how it feels, but also what the experience is about when you're trying to get help for those types of conditions. Because let's face it, everyone around us is affected by that in our lives, whether it's somebody going through it themselves or a partner trying to support their other half experiencing it. It's complicated. And up until very recently, there just wasn't a whole lot of research information available for it. And then, of course, this idea around a care model. How is our medical community helping us address that? And what really are the options for us? And how are we going to put more attention on research to garner, maybe new developments that could help us as technology and different things advance. So you really helped me sit down and think through all of that technical jargon that I just said and correlate it back to an experience that I was having. And, taking a step forward to think about it from, well, gosh, if I am struggling with these certain things, that's probably worth talking about as well. And then mapping it back into, the care model work and all the things that we want to increase and strengthen our experience as women, looking for solutions for ourselves. And so it became this story around a personal experience, and it was scary. I mean, I think I questioned myself for probably at least 2 weeks while we were in the drafting process, because it's really hard to open up, especially in this world where there's, so much happening digitally and feedback is everywhere around us. And it was vulnerable for me to have to talk about that because I tend to be an introvert and a really private person. So for me to put out there publicly, a health experience that I was having and map it back to everything we were trying to make better around these women's healthcare models, it was just scary overall. But as we went through that, and you provided some reassurance, and I had to work through trusting the process, what resulted was actually an overwhelmingly positive feedback from people that even now I run into and say, hey, you know what? That really resonated with me. And they start talking to me about what their experience is. And pretty soon, we've spent an hour unexpectedly talking more about, all these meaningful things in healthcare that are starting to come around and help support our women's health.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. There's so much to unpack here. And so what I'd love, and I'm sure I'm going to forget parts of it, but what I would love to do is provide a little bit of context about what this was, what it meant in a thought leadership role, why vulnerability was so important to doing this, and the story element. One of the things that you got, our audience here, that you got from Tina is background and good information and talking about turning jargon into something else. But there's a quick little story that I think helps provide some context. And Tina, forgive me if I get part of this wrong. So, please correct me.
Yeah.
But this all started when Tina was with a group of other healthcare executives who all happen to be women. And they happen to be sharing stories about perimenopause or menopause. and looking around and saying, man, somebody should really do something about the educational component of this when it comes to large medical centers. There doesn't seem to be a lot of going on there.
Yeah.
And they all hit pause. And they all looked at each other and were like, wait a minute, we could do this.
Yeah.
Who are we waiting for? Somebody else to come in with a solution? We can do this. And when we, Sterling Communication, heard this story from Tina Burbine, all of a sudden we knew we had a pitch because we had a story. And it was like all of these high profile, high powered women looking at each other going, wait a minute, there's something really missing from healthcare here, voices that haven't been heard. And there's a story here. We need to get it out. And so when she came to Sterling, we helped craft that story. And the first reaction for most people is, whoa, 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 that's a little oversharing, right? That puts me in a vulnerable position. But I will guarantee you, from a company that deals with the press all the time, creates investor decks all day long, right? That being able to tell a story where you open up and are vulnerable in an authentic way does more than gets people's attention. It activates the parts of the brain that start pumping out the chemicals that we need to make this happen. We get the oxytocin, that love hormone. We get dopamine, which regulates not only emotions, but activates the reward centers of your brain. And the conflict in there, that's even cortisol, the stress hormone. Well, guess what? All of that maps back to the story. And it all gets people's juices flowing to the point where, yes, they want to pay attention. So, Tina, I want you to bring up a point maybe that got lost a little bit there. When we took this story and we helped you craft and share it out to the world, we did it to build up some thought leadership. You got results out of that. These are the concrete results. This wasn't just like, oh, I shared my story, now let's move on with my regular work. Maybe you can highlight once again that concrete result of these conversations and new opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mentioned briefly that even today, I've got colleagues in the industry coming up, after continuing to see it, hear about it, and read that experience to talk to me about it. And it's actually led to other speaking engagements and work that's really centered around, well, how do you stand up a women's healthcare model? What does that mean? What are the things we need to be thinking about? How do you staff something like that? Because, historically it used to be the burden of an OBGYN, for instance. And we have other options these days. So it's led to a lot of really meaningful conversations with other female executives who have influence in their organizations to help guide and stand up this type of care model to better serve their patients and communities. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're all in this for. And that's been really meaningful for me to see, some change starting to be adopted and to know that we're on the right journey together, for all the right reasons.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's one of the toughest jobs that we have when we work with clients is helping find those points of vulnerability to provide authenticity. Every client will come to us and say, we hear authenticity is important.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. But you can't be authentic without sharing something true.
Yeah.
And often that puts you in a vulnerable position.
It does. I think back to that executive women's dinner that I was sitting at, where the seed for all of this was really planted. And it just took one person at that table that night making a small comment before the rest of us jumped in and started opening up more and more with each other about our own stories and our own, women's health journey. And we sat there and we looked around the table like, oh my word, we're all having in some ways very similar experiences around the challenges to get the support we need. So why aren't why aren't we talking more about this together and leaning on one another, and bringing that back into the influences that we have. So it's just, I think back to that night and it really stuck with me, because at the end of it, we walked away knowing that the challenge still existed, but we were bonded through the experience of what we had shared with one another. And to this day, we continue to get together for, recurring dinners every few months and kind of check in on everything. So it's been, that's that's what we all want, I think, in whatever it is that we're pursuing.
Thank you. Hey, we're halfway through our webinar here, and we've got a first question coming through. So I want to read it, and maybe you can take a first stab at it, and I can follow up with it. And the question is about working with agencies to, and I'm trying to shorten the question here a little bit, but it's working with agencies and the challenge of getting everybody on board with a single story. So given your experience in the boardroom and in the executive suite at several healthcare companies, what would you say is the most important part of getting everybody to sing from the same hymn book?
Gosh, I would start with, it has to be something that is short, concise, meaningful, something that is going to connect with the team so that they can remember it, run with it, share it continually. So I think that's where I would start. And it's words matter. Somebody taught me that a long time ago. And Kawika, you have really, really helped get the creative side addressed, because sometimes the technical words we use, they just don't evoke enough of our emotions when we're trying to engage and remember something. So, when I think about that tagline, the modernize, innovate, and grow, that's something that we're all referring to when we talk about the evolution of the changes that our teams need to go through these days inside our healthcare systems. But it's meaningful because it builds on the great work that's already been done. And it's something that our team can embrace and easily move forward and tie, whatever additional stories we're going to be sharing back to.
You just reminded me of a story, and I think I'll give the flip side to that, is when things aren't working well,
Yeah.
trying to address that. So we had a client come in, and it was the CEO, the CFO, and the CTO. So we got the chief executive, we got the financial officer, and we got the technology officer.
Yeah.
We're all in a room, and we are trying to redo their entire website. And nobody is agreeing on headings or subheadings or anything here, and everybody's getting involved. And the conversation is getting heated.
Yeah.
And they are literally in our conference room yelling at each other to the point where I thought I was going to have to break them up, like give them all a timeout and then come back. And I'm like, how am I going to get these people on the same page? How am I going to do? And I realized what we were doing was fighting over words that
Yeah.
mattered to them, but we weren't addressing the bigger picture, which is what is the story? And so we had to back up to the point where I needed a metaphor. So I ran out and I grabbed a bunch of index cards and Sharpies, and I ran back into the room and I handed each of the three executives one index card. And I said, I want you to write on this index card what kind of car your company is and why. If your company were a car, what is it and why? So they all scribbled down. I get back the cards, and it is a Ford F-150, a Tesla Model S, and a Honda Accord. I mean, if they put in maybe a Mack truck or a motorcycle, it would be a little different, but otherwise it couldn't have been more different. And I was just like, oh my God. But it was the why that started to be important. Why are you a Ford F-150? Because they were versatile, right? That's the versatility of a truck. Why were you a Tesla Model S? Because you were advanced, right? You were forward thinking. You were sleek. You were modern. And why were you a Honda Accord? I remember the answer was because it was reliable. You never have to worry about it. And all of a sudden we had 3 words,
Yeah.
right? We had useful or versatile. We had sleek and modern and innovative. We had reliable. So then we had something to work with to help tell this story.
Yeah.
So sometimes it takes really stepping back in order to see what the commonalities are that you can bring together and start telling a story.
Yeah. Kavika, I would love to talk about an experience I had 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
It
please.
was so unexpected and it has stuck with me. And I expect to carry it forward in so many ways. And it really correlates back to what we're talking about. So I had a unique opportunity to meet with a fairly well-known neurosurgeon who has built in the last few years a very successful neurosurgery practice or service within an existing health system on the East Coast. And going into that meeting, I was expecting him to share with me all kinds of things about, what it was like to have to take an existing hospital facility and try to figure out where to fit the team, what it was like to deal with, resources that were needed, what it was like to deal with all the operational challenges that come with doing that. And we didn't talk about any of those things. What he ended up sharing with me was his story around how he had to lean in and learn new leadership skills. And it meant him becoming more vulnerable and thinking about things from a team perspective because he wanted to do something different. And instead of put the pressure on the surgeons who were going to be part of this team individually around patient volume and all these different things we talk about in healthcare, he wanted to take a team approach and say, you know what, we're going to be incentivized as one unit and we're going to think differently and we're going to work together and we're going to collaborate. And if one of us needs help supporting a patient, we're going to dive in and we're going to do that holistically together. And our success is going to be built around how we are together, how we communicate, what our bond is. And he said he had to lean in and be willing to be vulnerable and have tough conversations together. And he pulled me right in immediately. And it stuck with me. And I think about all of the things that he shared since then in all of the work that I do day to day. And I've, gone on to share his story with others because it was so meaningful. And it was all about, leaning into our vulnerable side and willing to recognize the things that we individually need to learn and grow and talking about that with our team to, make us great together as we innovate and grow.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. It's really interesting. You're talking about the vulnerability coming from somebody in a very high-powered
Yep.
position, and the story that he told, which was not a recitation of facts. And I think that ties into another question that's coming in, and this is a little bit of a twist, so get ready for this one. But it has to do with AI and communication and health tech. So I'm kind of parsing it here a little bit. LinkedIn has a new AI feature that will help you write things for posting and articles on there. Google Workspace is building in some AI to help you outline and write things. And, it's everywhere. And the question has to do with how do we square these new technologies that are coming into the communication space with this idea of authentic storytelling and vulnerability and stuff. How does that all work together, or is it all in conflict? So we've got that, and we have another question after that. So why don't we start there? Do you want to tackle that, or do you want me to start with that one, Tina?
I'll share some thoughts on it.
Yeah, please.
I think that those tools can be helpful, but I think what's important is that we don't lose sight of our voices in the process of drafting whatever it is we're about to share. So if I just turn to a Gen AI tool, whether it's, pick your poison, it's a starting point, and that tool is never going to be able to integrate our personal experiences and really highlight the things that we were feeling through something, or you know, we need to make sure are really the highlights of the story that's crafted. So I think, they can be helpful resources to us, but don't lose our human voice and experience and everything that gives us the color in what we do day to day.
Actually, this is going to tie into the next question that we got. And this question comes from Joanna. Joanna, thank you for asking a question. I'm going to read hers verbatim. And I see the other side of the coin from what we are facing with AI on this question.
Yeah.
So here it is. With message development, how do you navigate how to navigate pushback when the C-suite almost insists on essentially ignoring their FDA-approved messaging and massage the messaging so that it fits the client's non-FDA-approved messaging? So here we almost have the opposite of how do you get clients back on the rails?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want me to start with
You start, and then maybe I could jump in after that, and also tap back into the AI question, because I think AI is just another way of I don't think AI is going to understand FDA approvals copy quite well, but personal experience aside. So why don't you start with that one?
Yeah, I'll start by saying, what I heard conceptually was this concept of we just don't have an agreed, aligned story overall that captures everything everyone is hoping to share. So I think it comes back to that words matter and what you were driving at earlier, which is at the heart of the why. What are we trying to describe together, and what does that mean to us?
Okay. And when you're getting pushback from the C-suite so I'm going to read this part of it again. When
Yeah.
you're getting pushback from the C-suite who's insisting on ignoring FDA-approved messaging. So first of all, we have to deal with this a lot, where the kinds of messages that we develop are lawyered up, right? You can't say this, you can't say that, you can't use the word safe, you have to do these kinds of things, right? Some of this is just legal. You just have to deal with the legal. But I also think some of this is understanding what's required and what's ideal. They're not always the same thing. So part of the navigating the pushback when they insist on ignoring FDA-approved messaging and massaging it, when you work with an outside agency, make sure that whatever that agency is has the experience of dealing with medical messaging, that has the experience with dealing with healthcare devices or those kinds of things. And they should be able to show you, here is the kind of stuff that we've had to deal with in the past. Maybe they have to anonymize it, so they're not revealing any secrets. But you need to know that they understand, because having a third party come in and be able to go to the C-suite and say, we want to tell a story and we want it to be authentic, but at the same time, we can't trip over the FDA here.
Yeah.
Here's how we thread that needle. So I can't give you a specific answer because every C-suite is different and every product or service is different. But what I can say from the agency experience I've had over the past decade is that it is critical to get them in alignment. And one of the best ways to do it is to have somebody from outside the company sort of play referee, like we did with the index cards. That's a little bit different than what we're talking about here. But this is make or break. If you go out there with an unapproved story and you're using words you're not allowed to use, you can be opening up yourself for all kinds of trouble. At the same time, if you go out there and you just have talking points or messages, that's not a story, and that's not nearly as effective. And I think that's what sometimes happens, is that everything is distilled down to a few bullet points, or a sentence or two that everybody has to read rote, and they're missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
from a communications standpoint, from an effectiveness standpoint, if you're only just telling messages, you're not making the kinds of connections. You're not lighting up the proper parts of the brain. You're not getting those neurochemicals, cortisol and oxytocin and dopamine. You need those things in order to change minds. You need those things in order to build trust. You need those things in order to forge relationships, financial or any otherwise. So, Joanna, thank you for that question. Another question that's come up here, and let me see if I can pull this one up real quick. It's about navigate it, or it's about one of the bullet points that we put in our messaging out about this. Navigating communication complexity without stifling creativity. And that's a little bit touches on what Joanna was bringing up. But how do you manage all this complexity that has to do without just completely flushing down the toilet creativity? At Sterling Communications, we call that decaffeinating. We come in and decaffeinate the coffee so much that nobody even wants to drink it. How do we avoid that? In your experience, have you faced that challenge, and how have you overcome it?
Definitely face it daily. I think we rely on a lot of analogies and getting back to what's the right story that frames out what we're trying to say, to simplify it, and to make it something easy that the team we're working with can really bond around. Even if it's something that's lighthearted and funny, the work we do in healthcare every day is very complicated and it's serious. So anytime, whether it's a leadership team who has to work through a difference of opinions or getting into an agreement around a particular story, keeping it as simple as we can, short, concise, and meaningful, I think at the end of the day is what helps drive everybody forward in the same direction. Kavika, what else do you think?
I don't know. I think you nailed it. And I think you nailed it also at the beginning of the conversation when you talked about the metaphor of the Sherpa, right? You've got clients who want to scale these great heights and do these amazing things, but they simply can't get there without a knowledgeable guide who not only understands the terrain and not only understands the goal, but understands that sometimes you need to turn left or right or back down or go a different direction without losing sight of that goal. And it has to understand everybody in the party, that they all have different experiences. They all have different conditioning. So you can't get to the top just by saying, here's my way, let's go. You have to understand a lot more. And I think that's part of Nordic's DNA, really. And the beautiful part about that, having a metaphor like that, is that once you get agreement that that's the right metaphor, then all of these other communication complexities that you have to deal with, you don't lose the creativity because you have the metaphor to rely on when all else fails. Are we the Sherpas that we want to be here?
Yeah.
Does this fit our brand? Does this fit our personality? Those questions are a lot easier to answer when you have that metaphor to hang on to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, listen, we got a couple more questions coming in, and some of them are very specific. So everybody, keep the questions coming. I think that's wonderful. This one's a very simple question, and it almost sounds like a job interview. So forgive me, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you this, Tina. So, what is the worst sin a corporate communicator can make in health tech?
Oh boy, gosh, the worst sin. I think it would be forgetting about why we are in this industry to begin with and not correlating things back to the patient.
I think that's probably better than my answer, but I'm going to give my answer too. I know the reason I like your answer is because when you keep in mind who needs the help or who's paying the bills, then you stay on the straight and narrow. When you start thinking of yourself as the protagonist in the story and not the client, not the patient, not the hospital system for you, or not the patient for them,
Right.
when they are no longer the protagonist, but you are, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big sin. The sin I was going to say,
Yeah.
but I like yours better, but I'm going to say mine anyway. I think one of the greatest sins in corporate communications, period, let alone health tech corporate communications, internally or externally, is being boring. You cannot bore people into action. Not
Yeah.
that most companies don't try. They try very hard to bore people into action. Let me tell you more. Let me give you more data points. Let me give you more slides. Let me put more text on the slide, a
Yeah.
paragraph, 5 paragraphs per slide in an inscrutable diagram. Please let me do that so I can convince you of what we are talking about. Well, guess what? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You cannot pummel people with facts and logic into changing their mind, because everybody has to change their mind if they're going to do business with you, whether it's from a sales standpoint, whether it's
Yeah.
a reporter out there, because their mind is already set on something else that they were doing, on some preconception that they have, or the fact that they don't have time for this because they got 15 other things that they have to worry about. So
Yeah.
it's no longer simply convincing people of what you're saying is true and worth writing about or worth buying into. It's
Yeah.
about getting people to stop whatever they're doing and change their mind. And that's even more difficult. Thankfully, we have stories to help us do that, to help break down those barriers, to build that trust, to be able to move forward in a new direction where people are enthusiastic and you've built a bond with them, as opposed to saying, wait, 5 more slides and I know you're going to get it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying slides aren't important, and I'm not saying that all this information isn't useful. Um, it's just not the tip of the spear when you're trying to puncture, the shields that we all put up to avoid being, buried in messages. Nobody ever raised their hand and say, "May I have more marketing, please, today?"
Well, the other thing I'll add, Kavika, to what you were just mentioning, you know, sharing a story and leaving behind the data on the slides, that's meaningful. Because to me, they're going to, whomever it is you're working with is going to connect and remember that moment. And if they need that information, the detailed data behind things, they've got it in their inbox.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Follow-ups like today, we could have all kinds of
Yeah.
PowerPoints. We could have all kinds of bullet points. We're happy to share the information with you another time, or have a one-on-one conversation with you about this kind of stuff if you're interested. We've got we've got about 8 minutes here, and I want to make sure to make the most of it. We've got an anonymous comment, so no name attached to this one. Looks like a little bit of a love letter, so I'm going to go ahead and read it verbatim here. I'm loving this conversation. There's a difference between marketing speak and discussion of real challenges and solutions. People aren't allergic to complexity, but they need to be able to see themselves in the story.
Yeah.
Sounds like good communications really stem from empathy. Um, there's something there. First of all, thank you very much. There's something there about people needing to see themselves in the story. And going back to the elements of the story, we're talking about setting, characters, point of view, plot, and conflict, right? The characters in your story need to be relatable. One of
Yeah.
the things that you'll always see in the award-winning stories in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or 60 Minutes or those kinds of things is that they take a complex topic, whether it's healthcare or anything else, and they try to frame it around some characters. Who's the protagonist in this story? And they try to find somebody relatable or at least really interesting that people are going to gravitate towards. And that, I think, ties into this point here about people needing to see themselves in the story. Often we take a second point of view. When I say we, I mean corporate communicators out there
Yeah.
who were not maybe not thinking about this. They use the second point of view. You do this and you do that and you do this other thing. But I think what gets missed in there is that, Bob or Susan or Ganesh, had this problem and they faced this challenge. And this company came in and they worked, all of a sudden you're dealing with a person, somebody relatable.
Yeah.
that they can see themselves in. So I think that's really important, whether it's web copy or press releases or anything else, to have those characters in the story.
Yeah. I mean, that to me is the human element of connecting.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't build those connections
Right.
without activating the right parts of the brain.
Yep.
Looks like we got time for one more question. No name attached to this one, but my org believes in creating messaging/content that contributes to positive mental health for those consuming it. But we still need to address the problems that we are tackling. How do you straddle the line between problem and solution in marketing messaging without being alarmist, overly negative, or ignoring, minimizing the underlying problems we address? I think I got part of an answer for that. But first, Tina, I just want to ask you, do you want to tackle any part of that, or just have a reaction to it before I try to address part of it?
Gosh, I don't know. My head goes to the value creation element. Like, how does it feel, to talk through having the right support? I don't know, Kavika, what comes to mind for you?
The funny thing is, the first thing that comes to mind is some companies that we worked with at
Yeah.
Sterling Communications a while back, in network security. Now, there's not a ton in common between network security and health tech, other than
Well,
maybe trying to keep things, cybersecurity and that kind of stuff.
yeah, it's
But
related.
yeah, one of the things that we always faced, was this tension between being alarmist, and keeping it real. And the problem was that everybody kept hearing over and over about, security breach, to the point where we actually made a supercut. We made a video of about 30 different movies and TV shows where people were yelling security breach. And we just cut them all together in a quick little 60-second thing to start off a conference. And it was so well received. People were laughing and cheering and applauding, security breach, security breach, security breach, all this kind of stuff, right? um, because they didn't want to be alarmist, but they wanted everybody's attention about it. So that was actually a fun project. But the question still remains: how do you straddle the line between problem and solution in marketing message without being alarmist, overly negative, or ignoring or minimizing? So I think part of the thing might be to acknowledge the fact that a lot of other companies, or a lot of, you don't even want to name a name here maybe, but just a lot of companies out there are sounding the alarm. Is the alarm worth sounding? What is it that we need to do? So what you are is, you're not being alarmist. You're pointing out alarming situations. You are in control. One of the things that always stuck with me was a police officer friend of mine, was watching. This is such a weird story, but I swear it ties in. Was watching a parent completely lose it with, a grade schooler in a grocery store. And, was just, the kid kept asking for stuff and putting stuff in the cart, and the mom kept putting it back, and she was just completely losing her cool. And finally just yelled, just stop, just stop, just stop, like this. Now, we've all done it as parents. We've all lost our cool in the past. But the interesting part of this story was that the police officer said, "I totally get it." This is a friend of mine just telling me this after the fact. "I totally get it. But the best officers will never lose their cool. You never see a police officer, throwing a tantrum, after a car stop, going, 'Show me your license. I don't care what you're doing today. Just show me.'" They don't lose their cool like that. At least they shouldn't. Um, Precisely because they're in control. Now, how does this tie back to the question? I look at you, the organization that we're talking about, and believes in creating messaging and content that contributes to positive mental health. Yet you've got all these scary statistics out there about mental health for teens, or anything else that is just off the charts bad. How do you do it? What you're doing, if you have to point out all the bad, what people often know about, but maybe you have some new statistics on, or a new approach to, you point it out not as, "Oh my God, this is so bad, you need to use us." You point it out as, this is a situation. And here we are, this calm center of a hurricane that you want to be in. We are, if we want to tell stories, it's a world where a storm is coming. And there are going to be people who need to take shelter. And right here, you can take shelter. And you can talk about the effects of the storm. You can talk about all the bad stuff that's out there, but you yourself are not alarming. You yourself are not caught up in that. What you are is calm. And with a good story about what it is that you're doing and how it is that you can help, I think that people start to gravitate toward that calmness. Even though the story may not, it has conflict and it has all these kinds of things, you need to be the storyteller that people want to attach themselves to. And I think with that, we're going to have to end this webinar. But Tina, I so appreciate the time and the consideration that you've given our audience here and the stories that you've shared, some very personal. I truly appreciate it.
I thank you. This has been wonderful. And I appreciate the questions from everyone and the time they took to be here with us.
Okay. And with that, we're going to wrap up. So we're going to end the recording. We'll create a transcript, clean it up. Any of my ums and uhs, hopefully we'll take out so I look smarter than I really am. And if you have questions beyond this, we're more than happy to try to answer them. But thank you for attending, the Strategic Narratives for Health Tech webinar from Sterling Communications and Nordic Global. We truly appreciate your attendance, and we look forward to talking soon.